This short video is going to describe how to write up your findings and your discussion chapter. And I'm going to give an example with something fairly trite or lighthearted. Let's say that we were doing a dissertation on American approaches to fidget spinners. What are fidget spinners? They're these little toys that rose in popularity for a short time in America, maybe globally even, probably globally. And maybe they're already on their way out in popularity. So obviously, the ability to write a findings chapter and a discussion chapter in your dissertation is directly tied to your ability to write a good chapter 1. Can you describe what's not known in your problem statement? Can you describe what you're going to find out in your purpose statement? And is it a good qualitative research question? In other words, you're not trying to prove a thesis like you would in a quantitative study. You're wanting to understand people's perceptions, their experiences. So you start with a question like, what are people's experiences or perceptions, or how do they perceive or think about something? Those are good types of qualitative questions. So I decided for this example to ask, what are American approaches to fidget spinners? Then you would move into your lit review. Your lit review helps show a few things. One, that you're aware of what research has already been done on the phenomenon. So you might show you know of the literature on schoolyard fads in general, but you haven't found any literature on fidget spinners in particular. So you might talk about the history of schoolyard fads or the prevalence of schoolyard fads. You might also do a lit review on the development of fidget spinners, the business of fidget spinners, but point out that no one has actually studied American approaches to them in the schoolyard. So your lit review is showing you do know what's been written and that nothing's been written on this particular research question. Then, of course, you move into the data collection. You go out and talk to the people who can answer your question. If you particularly wanted to know about schoolyard kids, then you talk to them. If you wanted to know teachers' approaches and parents' approaches, that might be an interesting part of the study, then you would talk to them as well. And you might include your observations. Now, all of that can be coded, both your interviews and your observations. Let's say that you interviewed a bunch of kids and they said things like, oh, they're cool, or I traded for a better one, or it makes me feel up to date. I was bored, so I played with the fidget spinner. It helps me pass the time. I have some cool ones. Only the cool kids play with fidget spinners. So you notice that you begin to see some trends, something about being cool or fitting in. So you have a theoretical code here, fitting in. And then you have another one about passing the time or being bored. So you have a theoretical code here, passing time. And then you have ones from kids about how they traded. And so if you have a number of those, you might see another theoretical code about trading. So now once you have these categories, these theoretical codes, you need to describe what are each of those codes like. And so you're looking at the parameters of each of those codes. You're further developing them. You have this inductive process you've gone through where you categorize the various codes, but now you're going to be a bit more deductive once you have them and find out, how do I describe each of those codes? So really, what does it mean to fit in? And you're talking with your participants as you're doing further interviewing, as your theory emerges, your categories emerge. Well, tell me more about what it is to fit in. Tell me more about what it's like to pass time or what it's like to trade. And so you develop those codes. Now, of course, your findings chapter, that's how it's going to develop. You're going to largely organize it around the major theoretical codes, and then the subheadings in each of those theoretical codes will be further descriptions of what each of those theoretical codes are like. So you're developing a theory is what's happening. Now, your findings chapter is not complete if all you have is descriptions. All you move from is, here's what one participant said, here's what another participant said. And even if all you have is some general theoretical codes that describe the various categories, you're not complete until you have described differences in approaches. What are factors that contribute to different approaches of fidget spinners, for instance? So if you describe all of your participants the same, you haven't done a very deep study, or it's not been thorough or even credible. Instead, you need to show that there's some theoretical explanation for the various approaches to your phenomenon. Now, we don't know what those are to begin with, but as you talk with your interviewees, you might begin to see factors contributing to fidget spinner approaches, for instance. And maybe as you talk, you begin to see that being well networked, for instance, for some kids resulted in less need for having fidget spinners. They had other ways to establish social networks rather than this trading of these schoolyard toys. Maybe you discovered that ethnicity impacted approaches to fidget spinners, that maybe people from a Asian background had one treatment of the schoolyard fad, or people from a Latino background had another treatment of the fad. And you're not proving causation. You're not saying that this is generalizable. You're just saying that there seems to be some factor here that resulted in different approaches. And so again, you show this as you're developing your theory in your findings chapter. You would help us to get to know the participants well enough that you're showing, you describe the participants, and you show how the ones with these factors had these approaches toward the fidget spinners, and the one with these other factors had these approaches toward fidget spinners. Again, not generalizable, but just helping to understand your participants better. Okay, so your findings chapter will start with a central understanding. And so the one I've come up with in this example, approaches to fidget spinners are related to how adolescents respond to the liminal phase, which is adolescence, as they respond to fitting in, passing time, and trading. So you can see my central understanding has the main theoretical codes there. And it shows that I'm going to give you, in the findings chapter, multiple approaches. And so it's going to be theoretical, and it's going to look at factors contributing to the various theoretical codes. Just to look at it again, approaches are related to sort of, we would call them variables in a quantitative study, but here they are difference in background, difference in experiences, or whatever the factors contributing to these approaches. That's why in order to pull off a central understanding, you have to have developed difference in your findings chapter, difference to approaches, difference to perspectives. And then you will organize your findings chapter around those theoretical codes. So you'll go through the first one. As I said, it was fitting in. I mentioned it in my central understanding above. It was one of the theoretical codes that emerged in my studies. And then I'll show different types of fitting in, different parameters for that were developed, and then begin to show the factors contributing to how different kids use fidget spinners or don't use fidget spinners to fit in. Then I'll move into the next theoretical code, passing time, and help my readers of my dissertation to know how what the different parameters are of that from my different participants, and then the different experiences, worldviews, education levels, whatever it is, factors that led to different approaches toward passing time. And then you do the same thing with trading. And so what you've done then is you've developed something unique, and you name your theory, and you describe it well. The reason you name it is so that it's a memorable contribution that you've made. Once you've done all of that, you've finished your findings chapter, you move to your discussion chapter. Now the discussion chapter, the whole purpose is to show is to further understand the theory that you just named and developed. You're trying to further understand the parameters of these theoretical codes that emerge. So it too is organized around the same theoretical codes often. Not always, but it's helpful if you do that, unless you have some good reason for not doing that. And so there, instead of discussing your participant data again, don't use the data again, but you discuss the literature and how it helps you better understand your theoretical codes of fitting in, passing time, or trading. And how does your data also call into question some of the claims that has been made in the literature. So that is your findings and your discussion chapter. Go do it.